we look at the American Revolution and we think, oh, good, we rebelled against those awful British. The bluecoats, I was 4 or 5, and I had those little plastic soldiers with the pivoting arms, with the rifle. I had the red coats, we had the blue coats. And I had the blue coats, and I'd line up all the red coats, and I'd send a little bowling ball down, not a bowling ball, a golf ball, something, cannonball, knock down the red coats. Okay, so we don't like the red coats. It's all part of American history. But for the people who were there in Lexington and Concord, for the people who actually fought the revolution, those redcoats were our soldiers. They considered themselves British subjects. And when they saw men in red, they thought, good, the king's army is here. I'm a subject of the king. They're here to protect us. And then they opened fire on them. And then all of a sudden things changed. It's so easy to look at that in history, isn't it? You just think, well, okay, turns out the British are our enemy. Now, you and I and everybody else who loves this country has a sense of that wrenching, nauseating sickness that comes from watching something you love turn into something that you hate and fear. I'm not at the point where I hate and fear the military, but I do hate and fear the command structure of this military. I find the entire Pentagon to be absolutely, utterly corrupt and incompetent, and you can throw in Langley as well. And in the long run, maybe when it's all said and done, maybe this is how it's supposed to be. It's possible that I and many of you grew up in a brief window in history when you felt like you could trust your government, when the army and the police were your friends, when you had faith that justice was going to be served, when you believed in the rule of law. Maybe now we have to go back to basics. And basics is we, the people, will find a way to do this, and we, the people, will get ourselves out of this situation. We will do it. I'm not concerned about that. And I'm not even so much philosophically bothered by the idea of no longer trusting our own military. It's probably good not to trust anybody in the government. That's really naive, and I am the living definition of naive sometimes. But we have to trust each other. And when I hear something like this from somebody who I trust, we don't want you, we don't need you, leave us alone, we'll get it done. I realize, okay, that's what they said 250 years ago. And now I understand it. James O'Keefe had sent his team undercover into some of America's classrooms, and on a series of exposés, the following day, they had a school board meeting. As this night continued and as the temperature started to rise, you could see that the school board members started to get a little uncomfortable because the parents were asking the kind of questions that, a journalist might have asked back in those quaint old days when we had journalists. They asked questions like, how long have all of you known about this? Because it's inconceivable to me as a parent that the principal and the vice principal wouldn't know that there was a Antifa flag and Chairman Mao posters on the wall in one of their classrooms for the last 2 years. And then they asked questions like, in the interview that we saw, the undercover interview, he says there are other teachers like that at school. What are their names and what are you doing about it? So here's why this is a new hope, for me anyway. The fact that these parents are so furious means that they were unaware of what was happening. Now, there's an enormous difference, a world of difference, an entire future of difference between not knowing and not caring. If they had not cared, I'd say this is yet another signal for all of us to pack up our beans and ammo and go live in the hills and kind of wait for the inevitable end. But that's not what we're seeing at all. These people are furious because they didn't know what was going on, and now they do. And that tells me, and by the way, this is in California, I might point out just a little, I think a little north of Sacramento. That's telling me that the vast majority of Americans who we always sit and wonder, why could you have done this? How could you have voted for this? Why do you let this continue? They let it continue because they don't know what's going on. And that's a very difficult thing for you and I to come to grips with because we've been digging into this stuff for 5, 10, 15 years now in some cases, but they haven't. And more importantly, they don't know what they don't know. And when you show them what is actually happening, and this is the most important point of all, which is why James O'Keefe and Project Veritas is so remarkably effective. I'm sure these parents have heard through emails or on Facebook or whatever that our kids are being indoctrinated, and that has the same effect as any other email or any other thing that you might read of something that's of concern, and I'll get to that later. But once they saw this guy, once they saw just how evil it was, once the guy said, yeah, I've got just a couple of days to turn them all into revolutionaries. How do you do that? Well, I scare the out of them. That's how. It's not that they don't care what's going on. It's that they don't know what's going on. And showing people what's going on is much easier than making them care about something they already know about. I was a big defender of the Iraq War and a big defender of the action in Afghanistan. I was defenders of them when they were a year or two old, not when they were 20 years old. But one point that I never gave up on and that I think needs to be mentioned today was that the reason that we thought these attacks would continue was because Al-Qaeda was all over the world, had the free run of Afghanistan. Bin Laden had disappeared. Their network was everywhere. And they had enormous numbers of recruits after their successful attack of 9/11. And I thought, we're going to start seeing this on a daily basis here. And we didn't. And I maintain to this day, and I continue to maintain it because this is what the evidence tells me, that the reason that we did not see continuing terror attacks, why there has not been, as I write this and as I record this on the 9th of September, the reason that there has not been a terrorist attack of any size on this country in 20 years is because all of the members of Al-Qaeda who were going to come over here and commit those atrocities are buried dead in the sands of Afghanistan and Iraq as a result of the United States military. Nobody knows exactly how many, but estimates are pretty good that it's around 40,000 maybe in Iraq and maybe half that much or perhaps a little more in Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda disappeared because we went and smashed them in the face. You can talk about all you want to about all of the mistakes that happened during that action and after the action and staying there and all of that. That's all up for discussion. That's fine. But what I simply cannot allow to go unnoticed is the fact that we killed 60,000 of them in the course of the 5 or 6 years immediately following 9/11. That's why there are no attacks.